let's come back. Richard Hertz is a longtime public opinion pollster and teacher of American politics at Sonoma State. He also recently started teaching at the JC as well. He's an expert in voter engagement, particularly among millennials, an avid Giants fan. He also worked in professional baseball for 13 seasons doing advanced video and statistical analysis. But around here, he's better known as Kathy Rogers' better half. Please, a warm welcome for Richard Hertz.
Thank you. For the record, the bio said other half, Kathy Rogers, not better half. I don't want to get talking at home. Also, tough crowd here. Finding good Samaritans. I'm nervous about saying something that could get me in trouble. Thank you for having me. Wow, what a time to teach American politics. As I tell students, we're getting into Weirdsville in a really big way. Never seen anything like that. But for someone who's done that for a long time, it's actually a very invigorating experience right now because young people are so engaged in this in a way that you just almost have no memory of. Maybe go back to movies from the 70s or something like The Candidate where you saw young people cheering, but when was the last time they really got involved or interested in politics? And what you hear on TV is correct about where young people are leaning. It's mostly a very heavy Bernie crowd, and just the excitement they have is really interesting. And, we've been talking the last, couple of weeks of as the path gets harder for Bernie. What will happen with younger people if it winds up being Hillary getting the Democratic nomination? And it's kind of a mixed bag, sort of. Well, if it's against Trump, they know what they're doing there, but. There's a little bit of the enthusiasm, but I think that this is at least starting to get them hooked into the process, which is the important thing, because as you know, there's a straight line as far as age and voting. The older you are, the more likely you are to vote. So it's just really exciting to see young people excited about this whole prospect, and regardless of outcome or who wins, just to see them engaged in the process again. Wow, two crazy races there. Who'd have thunk it? I remember lots of conversations with friends over the summer when Donald Trump started ascending in the polls, and all my political friends were saying, oh, they're just fooling around with pollsters. They don't really mean it. They'll get serious when the voting starts. And I go, I don't know. I don't think voters are really that subtle, at least in my experience. And yeah, he's hanging on. And then about a week ago, it seems that the Republican Party establishment finally recognized that, holy cow, this guy's not going anywhere, and they're in full panic mode trying to figure things out. And to say that the party is thinking of spending millions or having their affiliated committees spend millions to try to take down their own leading nominee, we are definitely in political Weirdsville. And also interesting on the Democratic side, very interesting results last night. Actually saw, and I didn't see many analysts say this, so I'll say it, very kind of strange geographical pattern. Hillary Clinton basically sweeping the South. She won Massachusetts by a narrow margin as well, but mostly doing very well in the South. And then Bernie Sanders picking up states kind of all over the place there, and raising an incredible sum of money in February. I think it's something like $40 million. And I think regardless of the outcome of the campaign, Bernie Sanders is already a winner in terms of setting a model that is, I think, the one that we want, where you say, no, we don't need to beg special interest or extort special interest for large campaign contributions. You can have a viably funded campaign with lots of small contributions. And so subtract the name Bernie Sanders and look at the accomplishment of what he has done in terms of being able to be electorally competitive just through small donations there. So it's really an extraordinary time. And it's looking like if it does wind up being Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump, we're kind of starting at a place that I'm not sure we've started before, where both candidates for the major parties are upside down, meaning that more people dislike them or have an unfavorable opinion of them than have a favorable opinion of them. So it's almost a battle of who do you dislike less, or something along those lines. But that's a pretty clear choice for most people. I don't think that there's a lot of undecideds out there. and obviously going to be a spirited campaign. One of the things that I find interesting in what the students say is talking about watching the debates and saying, well, they're more like things we did on the grammar school playground, you know, that kind of taunting and bad language sometimes, or things like that. And it's just very interesting watching their reaction to it. But a long way to go. Had a bunch of states vote last night, and you know, patterns seem to be getting clear, but I don't think are over yet there. And I think particularly, we'll see what happens. We'll know a lot more in 2 weeks when several big states vote, and you kind of start getting out of the South and seeing what happens. But watch the geographical pattern there, because that was something I was half asleep last night when I started noticing that. And we'll see if that persists. We really haven't had a battle where Democrats, one's doing better south of the Mason-Dixon line and one's doing better north. Not in a long time there, but will be a very interesting race. And I think we're going to have very, very high turnout for this election. And again, very few undecideds. This is going to be a turnout contest there. So we'll see what happens. But people generally like to ask pollsters questions. I usually prepare like 2 minutes of material and the rest is questions. So fire away.
So why the Democratic turnout in the primaries appears to be reasonably low? If the millennials are so inspired by Byrne, why aren't they turning out?
Well, they are turning out. This basically turnout in the primaries are low for, and they're not terribly low. They're low compared to the standard that Obama set in 2008. That just raised the bar beyond where it had been seen. It's actually historically reasonably middle to high, but lower than there. On why are they or not turning out? Some states they are. Not in Nevada, certainly. Haven't looked at the numbers last time, but you know, there is something that gets lost in translation between enthusiasm and actually voting. Sonoma State had a horrible distinction that I'm working to address from the June 2014 election. There's a precinct on campus there, and guess how many people voted in zip would be the actual number there. And it became national news when it became an election and nobody gained and all that stuff. So don't think my students at SSU and SRJC Matter don't hear about that. You know, they're going to wipe this stain off and make sure that some people vote. And in their defense, school had already adjourned there before summer school started. But I'm doing a lot of talks on absentee ballots because a lot of younger people don't understand that concept there. So, yeah.
Well, I have two questions. First, regarding polling, with phone, on Colorado news and all of that, you know, how accurate are, how can you do it, first of all, and how accurate are they? And secondly, we did a lot of hand-wringing about Citizens United.
Sure.
And the impact on big money. And we found out that, you know, someone like Jeb Bush that had huge money went nowhere. Is Citizens United being overblown at this point?
Well, go to your first question on how accurate is polling. Still pretty accurate. Most political polls are still done by telephone, which is kind of now the ancient method of polling. And there's lots of problems. Caller ID, that was really the beginning of the end of phone polling there in the mid-90s. And cell phones, you're not, you know, you can call cell phones, but it's more expensive and people tend to not want to do it that way. I think the industry as a whole has been very slow to move to online polling for political purposes, where most other polling is done online now. As I talk about sort of the biggies in the industry, I think some of them are going to die with a phone cord wrapped around their head. And still, you know, there is some correlation between, you know, the 5% of the people or so who will take a phone poll are as being likely voters. But what they miss is younger voters, and they miss sometimes people speaking other languages there. On the 2012 election, the phone polls systematically, despite what the Romney people were saying, that they were missing Romney voters, in fact, they were missing Obama voters. And they were about 3 to 4% off of what people actually voted, which is a pretty big miss along those lines. But if you average them, they're generally still pretty okay. It's, I think, smallish samples and stuff, and people's rush to get them are as big a factor as anything. But if you average them, they'll get you in the ballpark. It's interesting, a couple of candidates, Bernie and Donald Trump, they have some different things going on with polls there. Bernie generally runs about 3 or 4% better than his polls, than polls indicate, because his crowd, his voters are so young, and they are the toughest people to reach in phone polls. And so the polls have fairly consistently underestimated his support, not uniformly, but for the most part. Donald Trump does much better in online polls than in telephone polls with live interviewers. Why? We're just speculating, but I think it's because some people are embarrassed to say to a live person. There is some historical precedent for this. It's called the Bradley factor. Back in 1982, when Tom Bradley, the mayor of LA, ran for governor, the polls predicted that he was going to win, and in fact, he lost narrowly in that election. And the operating theory is that there was at least maybe 5–6% of the people would not say to a person on the phone that they would vote for an African American there. So, you know, it's one of the many reasons why online polling is far superior to, when done properly, and it can be done very properly. It's much better than phone polling because you subtract people's reluctance to say things to people. But, you know, the anonymity of the internet gives you much better response there. Louis, will beat me up if I don't say that.
Well, no. Now, Trump is touting how the Hispanics love him based on Nevada. I don't look at the percentages. I try to look at the total number of votes. As I got it, in all of Nevada, the total number of voters in the Republican primary were less than 20,000,
Right.
of which Hispanics were only 9,000. I'm sorry, 9%, which means that he probably got 120 to 130 votes. And nobody in the media who are living with this bothered to think about that he really had no voters. There was no one to, why are you letting him get away with this, or versus anybody else is using the polls? Because it's the actual numbers, not percentages. If
Well,
10 people came out to vote in Nevada and that's all, it's not some great victory. Why do you think that is, that the media is not picking up on the reality of the story and they all follow the lead of the believing percentage?
Well, you hit it right on the head when you said they all follow. There tends to be sort of a media, and there's no grand conspiracy. I have lots of newspaper and TV clients, and believe me, too many other things to do besides conspire. But they tend to generally pick a point of view, and then that's the prism in which everything is viewed from. And I think it's unfortunate because it doesn't open the mind to other possibilities. That's why I think Trump and Bernie were both very underestimated as candidates there. But the particular numbers you mentioned, that was not lost on me at the time. And students asking very incisive questions made the same point. How could Trump be so popular among Hispanics when they saw that number? And I made the same point that you did, Joe. It's a relatively small number of Hispanics within the Republican Party in Nevada. And then I happened to get a good break that same day that came out. The Washington Post did a large survey of Hispanics and said that 8 in 10 had an unfavorable perception of Donald Trump there. So wisely looking at the numbers in depth, because they don't always say what, sort of a trite analysis might say.
Yeah. Just curious what your thoughts are. I've heard some people making the suggestion that the fact that we're upside down and you've got two frontrunner candidates that lots of people don't like, is there any premise that we're moving towards a multi-party system instead of just the two-party system, more like Europe, where you'll have, we've got 7 or 8 different political parties and coalitions get formed, kind of thing?
You're on the right path, but I think the wrong direction. I think we're moving to a no-party system, or a system where parties have less and less impact. If you look at voter registration numbers that are out, nationally now it's estimated, and there aren't really hard numbers because you got to go to all 50 states to figure this out, but the current estimates are that 42% of the American electorate now does not identify with a party at all, just considers themselves independents. Democrats are down to about 29%, Republicans down to about 25%. In California, you see a very similar trend. The Republicans are really hemorrhaging voters in California down to, I think, like the Nationals, around 25%, 28%, depending on the numbers. Democrats kind of barely holding even to where they were. But independents are now, people who say declining state are now a quarter of the electorate in California. And so I think people are just sick of both parties. And you certainly see that in their candidate selections and favorites there. And they don't feel well served by them. And are moving away probably for good reason.
That being said, does that indicate that at some point there's going to be a change in the way districts are put together? Because that's all done by parties, number one, and number two, that's what's creating the divisiveness is the gerrymandering to get strongholds and throwaways.
Well, I can speak authoritatively on that because my first job out of college was as a gerrymander. Senate Elections and Reapportionment Committee in Sacramento there on the reapportionment of the 80s. And let me tell you, one of the best things that's happened in the state is when they took redistricting away from the legislature.
Yes.
Yes.
Because of too much of a conflict of interest and bizarre things that they wanted us to do. That would be a whole other talk. But I think it's just that, particularly millennials, they don't want to be pigeonholed into a party. They don't really have any connection to either party, and they just prefer to be independent. And again, I don't think members of either party feel well served by their leadership. And so, think about why we had parties to begin with. Go back to the 1790s. It was really a function of communications technology at the time. No internet, no TV, no radio, no telegraph even. And so parties gave people a way of, knowing something about candidates without having to, meet them personally, which was very difficult. Flash forward to today, I can ask you who was the actress who played Mr. Spock's mother in the original Star Trek series, and in about 10 seconds someone can get that on their smartphone. If that's the case, why can't we learn about our candidates that way? Why do we need to correction parties? So I just think they're becoming more and more irrelevant. Yeah.
Getting back to this question of the importance of the Citizens United case
Okay.
and money in politics. So what is driving interest now? If we no longer theoretically need the constructs of political parties, is it just Twitter and Facebook and stuff like that drives interest? I mean, what is, in your view, is it social media? What is driving voters' interest?
Let me go back to the money in politics. I'm sorry I didn't answer that second question there. I think what you're finding is that money in politics is becoming overrated. You're having more and more expenditures done by independent expenditures committees, which are not connected to the candidates, at least not theoretically, although there are some pretty good connections. But you're finding is most of that money is just kind of being flushed down the drain. It's been very ineffective. The Jeb Bush example was a very good point of that. People just aren't buying into these things. Plus, all dollars are not created equal in campaign spending. When you donate to a candidate, and that candidate wants to buy TV time, the TV stations are obligated by law to give them the lowest possible rate on ads. They have no such obligation with independent expenditure committees, so they will pay at least 5 times more for the same ad space, so it's very inefficient. And so I think the money thing in politics is overblown. I don't see Citizens United being, overturned, although with the Supreme Court thing, it is a possibility. But again, going back to what we have seen with Bernie Sanders, look at the money he is raising in these little chunks. And again, forget the name Bernie Sanders. If that can become the model for other campaigns, we are going to be in a much better place politically there. And it is Twitter driven. That's, a lot of that stuff is just going on through social networking. And young people in particular just feel there's no connection to the political system right now. They've been deserted and want to do something about it. Yeah.
So I just want to comment and a question, a shout out to educators in general, the interest by the younger people. I have an 11-year-old that in their class every morning they watch some youth version of CNN, and that creates a lot of discussion within the class. And then I have a senior that has an oral interpretation class where they talk about this kind of stuff all the time. So I think from younger to obviously college, it's being brought up more in an educational setting. So that's great.
And people are starting to talk about politics more in entertainment media. We owe a tremendous debt to Jon Stewart and Stephen Colbert for just inspiring people to pay attention to politics and get them into it. John Oliver, I don't know if you saw his Bible rant against Donald Trump. I debated showing it to my classes, but there was no debate with them. They wanted to see it, and after I gave them the appropriate language warnings, they were just in stitches watching this thing. And you know, when politics gets into a more popular culture thing, I think it's a good thing for the country. Just anything that gets people to vote, forget how they vote, especially younger people, if you can get them in the habit, that's important. And by the way, working on a project there that is aimed straight at millennials that you'll hear more about called Next Gen Elect, where we're trying to get more and more people, younger people, registered and voting on a regular basis, even if we have to bribe them a little. We'll see what they'll do for a free cup of coffee.
The exit polls last night, I didn't see anything about the age differential. They had the sexes and the races, and Bernie, on the Democrat side, Bernie only won the white males, but they didn't have anything on age.
Wonder why? Got me? I would release it. The polls have been pretty consistent, as have most of the election results. I think maybe a little less so in Nevada. But I mean, there's just this huge age cleavage within the Democratic Party, at least, between younger voters and older voters.
How do the voter ID laws affect the election right now? Like in Texas, if you have an NRA card, you're okay, but if you're a student ID card, which is just crazy.
Well, it's not an NRA card, but it's a concealed weapons card. Same point. You show them concealed weapons. Maybe the people are more scared if you don't let them vote. I don't know that we see it so much in the primaries, but we'll probably see it in the generals. And that's one of the things I really talk to students about. I'm kind of at a couple of levels. I'll go around the room first and I'll say, how many of you have photo IDs? And of course, everybody raises their hand. And I make the point that, well, while that's true, and while photo ID just sort of sounds like a normal, you know, reasonable thing, I point out that many people in the South, older people, people of color, people who don't have a lot of money, they're not driving, they don't need a photo ID. And that this thing of, well, you can get the election ID for free. Well, that's true, except that try getting a copy, a certified copy of your birth certificate and all the other documents you need to get there. I think it's a travesty, frankly. They're disenfranchising at a minimum hundreds of thousands of voters who have been voting for years, and now all of a sudden they're ineligible to vote, and it's not hard to figure out why they're doing it. So, am I getting close, or you're
Yeah, I think a couple more questions.
couple more? There you go.
What's happening with the push for registering voters? I didn't hear anything about that. Besides your next gen.
Secretary, you see the legislature passed and they've implemented a new sort of voter law that says that when you come in contact with a state agency there, they will automatically register you unless you opt out of it. Will that increase the registration or the turnout? It may actually have the opposite effect because you're registering people who maybe necessarily don't want to vote and don't vote. So you might be registering more people, but there's no guarantee they're going to turn out. But it's too early to know for sure.
So, should I go put my $100 in the Giants to win the World Series this year?
Let me tell you, baseball is the worst sport you could possibly bet on. Too many intangibles. The ball hits a pebble, shoots over someone's head, and there goes Game 7. So enjoy the Giants. They've got a good team. Season ticket holder. I'm looking forward to it, but never bet on baseball. Too many intangibles. Yeah.
Based on what you do for a living, and looking both historically and what's happening right now, simple question, can Trump win the presidency?
Yes.
I'm sorry I asked.
Will he? Is he likely? No. You know, either Hillary Clinton or Bernie Sanders would be favored against him. What's interesting, and there's a real misconception about this in terms of electability. There's a big body of polls that say that Bernie Sanders is a much stronger candidate than Hillary Clinton in the general election. And the math isn't hard to do. They both run well among Democrats, but he runs much better among independents and will even pick up a few Republicans. But the operative theory that a lot of Democratic establishment is going for is, well, you know, once the Republican party turns loose the hammer and sickle and calls him a communist a million times, that'll scare the voters away. I don't buy into that. People already know what Bernie Sanders is, and again, the math is very simple. But it's interesting, both parties are pushing, well, I would say the Republicans are actually pushing Donald Trump, pushing off a cliff maybe, but both parties are moving forward with the candidates who are the weakest against the other party. So it's kind of almost a double McGovern race in that respect there. Yeah.
What odds would you put on the Republican Party splitting in the election and running a third-party candidate?
I wouldn't want to put odds on it, but, you know, if Donald Trump either has all of the delegates he needs going into the convention or is very close, if they took it away from him by changing the rules or doing something like that, it'd just be suicide. Same thing on the Democratic side. If Bernie Sanders winds up winning more of the elected delegates, and it's the super delegates that would put her over, you're just going to turn off an entire generation of people. And again, there's a lot of forces pushing people away from the parties. And then we also had the Democratic Party's decision to start accepting lobbyist and PAC contributions after not doing it for 8 years. I don't know how much more tone deaf you could be about when the big issue in this campaign is money in politics, they start doing that. I mean, I don't know what they're thinking.
Richard, only in Sebastopol, a brand new Tesla, minimum $103,000 off.
Is that the speaker's gift?
With a Bernie sticker on the back.
With a what sticker?
With a Bernie sticker on the back.
Only in Sebastopol, the land of Priuses. Thank you so much.
Token of our appreciation.
Thank you.
You can fill that out later.
Thank you. Pick a winner there?
Pick a winner for us.
And I also just want to throw in a picture of how much I've enjoyed hanging with you all since Kathy's very great. The stomach for doing good deeds, my kind of people. Want me to read it? You got it.
You better read it.
Mine are still kind of working.
7093.
My kids, I don't have my glasses.
You do have the winner.
Come on down.
Rich, get richer.
We missed that.
You're done, Rich.
Two of them.
You know what, I'll take
Queen from spades, all right.
I love this. Can we still buy this, Michael?
You can still buy this.
Please do.
Oh,
But you have to do regular buy.
look, it says relevant.
All right.
Buy it and drink it.
Door prize is courtesy of Terry Kelly for this.
For cigars.
Jim Long.
Of course.
Have a cartoon as well.
Camel joke.
More prepared.
This blind guy goes up to a bar and he sits down and he says to the stranger next to him, hey, would you like to hear a blonde joke? And the blonde says, well, I'm a woman, I'm 6 foot tall, and I'm a pro wrestler, and I'm blonde. And the woman next to me is 6 foot 2 tall, and she's a professional bodybuilder. And then our other friend is 6 foot 5 and is a kickboxing champion of the world. Now, would you still like to tell your blonde joke? And the blind guy says, well, no, I wouldn't want to explain the thing 3 times.